The smoke from Virginia Nash's cigarette curled toward the ceiling of the Golden Cactus Saloon as she stared at the empty ledger in front of her, the numbers refusing to add up no matter how many times she recalculated. Outside, the main street of Salida, Colorado was coming alive with the morning bustle, but inside, Virginia felt the same dead weight in her chest she'd carried for nearly 3 years since signing her name on Hank Porter's contract. Salida, nestled in the heart of Colorado territory, had boomed in 1876 with the promise of silver and the coming of the railroad. Virginia had arrived that same year, a 22-year-old widow with nothing but her mother's locket and dreams as big as the mountain ranges surrounding the town. Now, at 25, those dreams had been replaced by the constant reminder that she wasn't truly free. "Miss Nash." Hank Porter's voice sliced through her thoughts as he appeared at the top of the stairs, adjusting his silk waistcoat over his protruding belly. "I noticed we're down 2 bottles of Kentucky bourbon from last night's inventory." Virginia extinguished her cigarette in the metal ashtray. The Calloway brothers were celebrating their new claim. They paid in full, plus extra. Porter's eyes narrowed as he descended the stairs, his heavy footfalls punctuating each step. At 53, Porter owned half the businesses in Salida, including the debt that kept Virginia tethered to the Golden Cactus. And where might that extra be? He extended a meaty palm. Virginia reached into the pocket of her skirt and produced the additional dollars, placing them in his hand without meeting his gaze. The original arrangement had seemed simple enough. Porter would finance her purchase of the saloon, and she would repay him from the profits. What she hadn't understood was how Porter's accounting ensured she would never fully own the establishment. 3 years, Virginia," he said, tucking the money into his vest pocket. 3 years and you've barely made a dent in what you owe me." "The terms keep changing, Hank," she replied, her voice steady despite the fury building inside her. "The interest grows faster than I can pay it down." Porter smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "That's business, my dear. Perhaps if you offered more services, like Madame Rose's girls across town, you'd find yourself out of debt sooner." Virginia's hand tightened around her pencil until she feared it might snap. "The Golden Cactus is a respectable establishment. I serve drinks, not myself." "Pity," Porter said with a chuckle. "Well, I'll be back on Friday for the weekly payment. Don't disappoint me." He tipped his hat and sauntered toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Oh, and Virginia, I've added a small fee for my personal supervision of your business venture. It's all in the contract." The door swung shut behind him, and Virginia finally allowed herself to release the breath she'd been holding. She pulled out the contract from beneath the bar, the document that had become her prison. The original loan had been for $1,200, but with Porter's creative accounting, she now owed him nearly $2,000. At this rate, she would be indebted to him for the rest of her life. The morning sun filtered through the windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Virginia tucked away the ledger and began her daily routine of wiping down the bar, arranging glasses, and preparing for the day's business. The Golden Cactus wasn't much, a long mahogany bar salvaged from a Denver establishment, 15 tables, a small stage for the occasional musician, and rooms upstairs that she rented by the week to respectable travelers. But it was meant to be hers, her fresh start after losing her husband to cholera in St. Louis. By noon, the saloon had begun to fill with its regular patrons, miners stopping in for a midday whiskey, ranch hands taking a break from the summer heat, and the occasional traveler passing through. Virginia served them all with the same practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Heard there's a cattle drive coming through." Old Pete Jenkins informed her as she poured him his usual rye whiskey. The elderly prospector had been one of her first customers and had appointed himself the saloon's unofficial town crier. "Is that so?" Virginia replied, only half listening as she calculated how much of today's earnings Porter would claim as supervision fees. "Yep. Bringing 3,000 head up from Texas to the railroad. Word is they'll be here by sundown. Means good business for you." Pete sipped his drink appreciatively. "Thirsty cowboys with money in their pockets." Virginia nodded, her interest piqued. A cattle drive meant increased revenue, which might help her make a dent in Porter's ever-expanding debt. "Thanks for the tip, Pete." As the afternoon wore on, Virginia found herself watching the door with increasing frequency. The promise of additional business had sparked a small flicker of hope, something she hadn't felt in months. Perhaps with a substantial influx of cash, she could begin to negotiate with Porter for more favorable terms. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains when the first cowboys arrived, trail dust still clinging to their clothes and fatigue evident in their gaits. They entered in twos and threes, ordering whiskeys and beers, their voices filling the saloon with tales of the trail. Virginia and her two employees, Mary, the barmaid, and Thomas, who handled security, worked efficiently to serve the growing crowd. "Quite a gathering," Mary commented as she collected empty glasses. At 19, she was Virginia's youngest employee, with a quick smile and quicker wit. "Let's hope they're generous tippers," Virginia replied, pouring 3 whiskeys for a group of weathered drovers. The evening progressed, and the Golden Cactus filled to capacity. The atmosphere was jovial but controlled. Virginia ran a tight establishment with rules that were strictly enforced by Thomas, a former boxer whose imposing presence deterred most troublemakers. The piano in the corner came to life under the fingers of a local player, adding to the convivial mood. It was nearing 9 o'clock when the saloon doors swung open, and a tall figure paused in the entrance. The conversations nearest the door quieted momentarily as the newcomer surveyed the room. Virginia, busy serving drinks at the far end of the bar, didn't immediately notice his arrival. The man moved with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention without seeking it. His dark hat was pulled low over his eyes, and his duster bore the marks of long days on the trail. As he approached the bar, patrons instinctively shifted to make way. Virginia looked up as he reached the counter, and for a moment, she found herself caught in his steady gaze. His eyes were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin, and the faintest hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Evening, madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "Might I trouble you for a whiskey?" Virginia nodded, reaching for the bottle of decent bourbon she kept for customers who looked like they might appreciate it. "You're with the cattle drive?" she asked, pouring a generous measure. "I am. Name's Vaughn Prescott, trail boss." He placed a silver dollar on the counter, more than twice what the drink was worth. "Virginia Nash," she replied, sliding the glass toward him. "Owner of the Golden Cactus." His eyebrow raised slightly. "Owner. Not often you find a lady running her own saloon in these parts." "Not often, but not unheard of," Virginia countered, reaching for his change. Vaughn waved it away. "Keep it. Good whiskey deserves proper payment." Virginia nodded her thanks, tucking the coin into her apron pocket, a small victory in her ongoing financial battle. She moved to serve another customer, aware of Vaughn Prescott's eyes following her. Throughout the evening, Virginia noticed that unlike most of his men who had settled into games of poker or were enjoying the company of the local girls who had drifted in, though not working girls, Virginia didn't allow that in her establishment. Vaughn remained at the bar. He nursed his drink slowly, occasionally exchanging words with his cowboys, but mostly observing the room with the watchful eye of a man responsible for others. Near midnight, as the crowd began to thin, Virginia found herself back in front of him, wiping down the bar. "Successful night?" he asked, gesturing to the busy saloon. Virginia offered a small smile. "Can't complain. Your men have been respectful." "I insist on it," Vaughn replied. "A man's behavior in town reflects on all of us." He studied her for a moment. "If you don't mind my saying, Miss Nash, you don't seem entirely happy for someone who's had such a profitable evening." Virginia's hand paused in its circular motion on the counter. Most patrons didn't notice or care to notice anything beyond their drinks and entertainment. "Just tired," she deflected. "Running a saloon doesn't allow for much rest." "I reckon not," Vaughn agreed, though his eyes suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "How long have you owned this place?" "3 years," Virginia answered, resuming her cleaning. Though owned might be a generous term, Vaughn's expression shifted with interest. "How so?" Virginia mentally chastised herself for revealing even that small detail of her situation. "It's complicated," she said, forcing lightness into her tone. "Business matters often are." Before Vaughn could respond, a commotion erupted at one of the poker tables. 2 cowboys, one from Vaughn's drive and a local ranch hand, were on their feet, accusations of cheating flying between them. Thomas was moving toward the disturbance, but Vaughn was quicker. With surprising speed for his size, he positioned himself between the 2 men. "Settle down, Barnes," he addressed his cowboy, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. "What seems to be the problem?" "This fella's been marking cards," Barnes spat, his hand hovering dangerously close to his holstered revolver. The local ranch hand, a young man named Everett, flushed with anger. "That's a damn lie." Virginia watched as Vaughn assessed the situation, his composure never wavering. "Let's see these cards then," he said, picking up the deck and examining it closely. After a moment he looked at Barnes. "These cards are clean. You've had too much to drink and too little sleep. Time to call it a night." Barnes hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but something in Vaughn's steady gaze made him reconsider. He mumbled an apology and backed away from the table. "Sorry for the trouble, Miss Nash," Vaughn said as he returned to the bar. "I'll cover any damages." "No harm done," Virginia assured him, impressed by his handling of the situation. Most trail bosses would have backed their man regardless of who was at fault. "Thank you for intervening." The incident had broken the tension in the room and conversations resumed. As the hour grew late, patrons began to depart, either to their rooms upstairs, homes in town, or the camp set up outside Salada for the drovers. By the time Virginia began closing up, only a handful of customers remained, including Vaughn Prescott, who had moved to a table near the window, a cup of coffee replacing his whiskey. "We don't normally serve coffee this late," Virginia remarked as she collected empty glasses from nearby tables. "I imposed upon your barkeep," Vaughn admitted. "Hope that's not against the rules." "I'll let it slide this once," Virginia replied, surprising herself with the ease of their banter. It had been a long time since she'd engaged in conversation that wasn't strictly business. "Mighty generous of you," Vaughn said with a smile that transformed his weather-worn features into something Virginia found unexpectedly attractive. "We'll be in town for 3 days, waiting on the cattle cars. Would it be possible to arrange a bath at some point? Trail dust gets into places a man doesn't care to mention in polite company." Virginia nodded. "I can have hot water brought up to one of the rooms tomorrow morning if you'd like to rent one. $2 a night, bath included." "That sounds like heaven after months on the trail," Vaughn said, reaching into his vest pocket and producing the money. "I'd be obliged." As Virginia took the payment, their fingers brushed momentarily. She withdrew her hand perhaps too quickly, unsettled by the small spark she'd felt at the contact. "Room 4, top of the stairs," she instructed, tucking the bills into her pocket. "Breakfast is served from 6 to 8. Vaughn tipped his hat. "I'll be there at 6 sharp. Good night, Miss Nash." Virginia watched as he climbed the stairs, his spurs jangling softly with each step. There was something about Vaughn Prescott that intrigued her, a steadiness that seemed rare in a profession known for its transient nature. She shook off the thought as she continued closing up. A cattle drive boss would be gone in 3 days, along with his men and their money. Her problems would remain. After the last patron had departed, Virginia locked the front door and began the final accounting for the night. The evening had indeed been profitable, more so than any in recent memory. Perhaps, she thought with cautious optimism, this could be the beginning of a financial turnaround. Mary approached, untying her apron. "That was some night. My feet are killing me." Virginia smiled at the young woman. "You did well. Get some rest tomorrow, might be just as busy." After Mary and Thomas had left, Virginia retreated to her small quarters at the back of the saloon. The room was modest but neat, containing a bed, a dresser, and a small writing desk. It was a far cry from the elegant home she'd shared with her husband in St. Louis, but it was hers, or would be, if she could ever escape Porter's financial stranglehold. Virginia changed into her nightgown and sat at the desk, pulling out her personal ledger. She carefully recorded the night's earnings, subtracting expenses and setting aside Porter's payment. Even after his cut, she'd made more tonight than in the previous 3 days combined. As she prepared for bed, Virginia found her thoughts drifting to Vaughn Prescott. There was something in his direct gaze that suggested he saw more than most, perhaps too much. She couldn't afford to let anyone glimpse the true precariousness of her situation. Porter would use any sign of weakness to his advantage, possibly demanding she sell the saloon to him outright, something she'd refused to consider despite his increasingly aggressive suggestions. Virginia extinguished the lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the occasional sounds from the street, a dog barking, the distant laughter of late revelers, the whisper of wind through the cottonwood trees. 3 more days of the cattle drive's business might give her enough leverage to renegotiate with Porter. It wasn't much, but it was more hope than she'd had in months. With that small comfort, she drifted into sleep. Morning arrived with the persistent crow of a rooster from the neighboring property. Virginia rose, dressed quickly in a practical blue dress, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. She made her way to the kitchen where her cook, Mrs. Abernathy, was already preparing breakfast for the boarders. "Morning, Mrs. Abernathy." Virginia greeted the robust woman who had come with the saloon and stayed on after Virginia purchased it. At 60, Eleanor Abernathy was a widow who ruled her kitchen with an iron fist and produced the best biscuits in the county. "Morning, Miss Virginia," Mrs. Abernathy replied, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Heard we had quite a crowd last night." "Indeed we did. The cattle drive arrived." Virginia poured herself a cup of coffee. "We'll need extra portions today. They're staying 3 days." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, already mentally adjusting her preparations. "That tall fellow who took room 4, he asked if breakfast could be ready at 6 sharp. Said he's got men and cattle to tend to." "Mr. Prescott, the trail boss," Virginia confirmed. "Yes, I told him breakfast starts at 6. At precisely 6 o'clock, Vaughn Prescott appeared in the dining room, his hair still damp from what must have been an early bath. He'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline previously obscured by trail stubble. In clean clothes, a collarless white shirt and dark vest, he cut an impressive figure. "Good morning, Miss Nash," he greeted her as she emerged from the kitchen carrying plates of eggs and biscuits for the few early risers. "Mr. Prescott," she acknowledged with a nod. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in months," he admitted, taking a seat at a small table. "A real bed is something a man doesn't properly appreciate until he's spent 90 nights sleeping under the stars." Virginia set a plate before him, along with cutlery wrapped in a clean napkin. 90 days on the trail, that's a long drive. "Started in San Antonio," Vaughn explained, unfolding the napkin. 3,000 head of longhorns bound for Chicago stockyards. "We'll load them onto cattle cars here. Then my men and I will head back south for the next herd." As Virginia moved to serve other guests, she couldn't help but notice how Vaughn's eyes lingered on her. It wasn't the lascivious stare she often received from traveling men, but something more contemplative, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. The morning progressed quickly as Virginia balanced serving breakfast with preparing the saloon for the day ahead. By noon, the establishment was once again filling with patrons, a mix of locals and drovers. Virginia was restocking glasses behind the bar when she sensed someone approaching. Looking up, she found Hank Porter standing before her, his expression sour. "Quite a profitable night, I hear," he said without preamble. "The whole town's talking about how the Golden Cactus was bursting at the seams." Virginia straightened. "Good news travels fast. Indeed it does. I thought I might collect yesterday's earnings now, seeing as you've had such success." Porter placed his hand on the bar, fingers drumming impatiently. "Friday is our arrangement, Hank," Virginia reminded him, continuing with her task. "Nothing has changed." Porter's face darkened. "I own half this establishment, Virginia. I can change our arrangement whenever I see fit." He reached into his coat and produced the contract. Page 3, paragraph 2. "The lender reserves the right to adjust payment schedules as necessary to protect his investment." Virginia felt a chill run through her despite the warm day. She'd read the contract countless times, but Porter seemed to find new clauses whenever it suited him. "I'll have your money on Friday, as always," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I want it now," Porter insisted, his tone lowering as customers glanced in their direction. "Consider it a show of good faith." Before Virginia could respond, a shadow fell across the bar as someone took position beside Porter. "Is there a problem here?" Vaughn Prescott asked, his voice casual but his stance suggesting otherwise. Porter turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "This is a private business discussion." Vaughn nodded amiably. "I can see that. Just thought the lady might need assistance, given your tone." Virginia was torn between gratitude for the intervention and concern that it might make matters worse. Porter didn't respond well to challenges, especially public ones. "Mr. Prescott," she said carefully, "Mr. Porter and I were just discussing some financial matters. Nothing to be concerned about." Vaughn's eyes moved between them, assessing the situation. "If you're sure, Miss Nash." Porter smirked, tucking the contract back into his coat. "Miss Nash and I have an understanding, don't we, Virginia?" "Yes," she replied, the word tasting bitter. "We have an agreement." "I'll return on Friday," Porter said, his momentary anger concealed behind a businessman's smile. "Enjoy your cattle drive customers." With a nod to Vaughn that held more warning than courtesy, he departed. Once Porter had gone, Vaughn turned to Virginia. "That man seems to have quite an effect on you, Miss Nash. Your knuckles were white gripping that glass." Virginia released the tumbler she'd been holding, flexing her fingers. "Mr. Porter is difficult at times, but he's a business associate." "Some associates aren't worth the trouble they bring," Vaughn observed. Virginia met his gaze directly. Some of us don't have the luxury of choosing our associates, Mr. Prescott. A flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. I see. Well, if you ever need a friendly ear, I've been told I'm a good listener. Virginia found herself tempted by the offer. There was something about Vaughn Prescott that inspired confidence, a rare quality in her experience, but years of self-reliance and caution held her back. That's kind of you, she said, but I manage my own affairs. Vaughn nodded, accepting her boundary without offense. As you should. I'll leave you to your work then. As he rejoined his men at a corner table, Virginia exhaled slowly. Porter's unexpected visit had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. If he was already trying to change their payment schedule, what other alterations to their arrangement might he attempt? The cattle drive's business was a blessing, but it could become a curse if Porter saw it as an opportunity to increase his demands. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as Virginia focused on her customers and pushed aside worries about Porter. The Golden Cactus was again filled to capacity by evening, with Mary and Thomas working alongside her to keep up with demand. Virginia was serving drinks at a table of drovers when she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. "Prescott's been asking around town about that Porter fella," one cowboy said to another. "Seems mighty interested in the man's business dealings." "What's it to him?" his companion asked. The first cowboy shrugged. "You know the boss always looking out for folks who might need a hand. Remember that widow in Amarillo?" Virginia moved away before they could notice her eavesdropping, her mind racing. Why would Vaughn Prescott be inquiring about Porter? The idea that he might be investigating her situation sent a wave of embarrassment through her. She'd worked hard to maintain her dignity and independence, despite Porter's increasing control over her business. The last thing she wanted was to appear as an object of pity or charity. When Vaughn entered the saloon later that evening, Virginia deliberately kept her distance, focusing on customers at the opposite end of the bar. But as the night wore on, she found it impossible to avoid him entirely. "You've been avoiding me, Miss Nash," Vaughn said when she finally approached to refill his whiskey. "I've been busy," Virginia replied, pouring the amber liquid. "In case you haven't noticed, your men are keeping us on our toes." Vaughn smiled, though his eyes remained serious. "I've noticed plenty, including how that man Porter seems to have you cornered." Virginia stiffened. "I don't recall asking for your assessment of my business affairs." "You didn't," Vaughn acknowledged, "but I've never been one to stand by when someone's in trouble." "I'm not in trouble, Mr. Prescott," Virginia insisted, lowering her voice. "I'm in business. There's a difference." Vaughn leaned closer, his voice equally quiet. "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, that man holds something over you, something that's causing you considerable distress." Virginia glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "Why do you care? You'll be gone in 2 days, back to Texas, or wherever the trail takes you. My arrangements with Hank Porter will remain my concern, not yours." "Maybe I'm tired of just passing through places," Vaughn replied, his candor surprising her. "Maybe I'd like to know I left something better than I found it for once." Virginia studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. In her experience, men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. "And what would you want in exchange for this?" "Improvement." Vaughn's expression darkened slightly. "I'm not Porter, Miss Nash. I don't demand payment for basic human decency." Virginia felt a flash of shame at her assumption. "I apologize. Experience has taught me to be cautious." "No need to apologize," Vaughn said, his expression softening. "Caution keeps a person alive in this world, but sometimes, Miss Nash, help comes without strings attached." Before Virginia could respond, a crash from across the room demanded her attention. Two minors had knocked over a table in their enthusiasm for a dice game. With a nod to Vaughn, she hurried to address the situation, secretly relieved for the interruption. The remainder of the evening kept Virginia too occupied for further conversation with Vaughn, though she was acutely aware of his presence until he retired to his room shortly before midnight. His interest in her situation with Porter was both concerning and, if she was honest with herself, a small comfort. It had been a long time since anyone had expressed genuine concern for her welfare. The next morning, Virginia rose early as usual, her mind still turning over Vaughn's words from the night before. As she entered the kitchen to help Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast preparations, she was surprised to find Vaughn already seated at the small table where the staff took their meals. "Mr. Prescott," she said, pausing in the doorway. "You're up early. Habit from the trail," he explained, rising from his seat. "Mrs. Abernathy was kind enough to offer me coffee while I waited for breakfast service to begin." The cook smiled at Virginia from her position at the stove. "Such a polite young man. Said he wanted to speak with you before heading out to check on his herd." Virginia nodded, trying to ignore the fluttering sensation in her stomach. "What can I help you with, Mr. Prescott?" "I was hoping we might continue our conversation from last night," Vaughn said. "Perhaps somewhere more private." Mrs. Abernathy busied herself with her cooking, though Virginia knew the woman was listening intently. News traveled fast in Salada, and a private conversation between Virginia and the handsome trail boss would be fodder for gossip. "I have some inventory to check in my office," Virginia said, making a quick decision. "You're welcome to join me for a few minutes." Virginia led Vaughn to the small room off the main saloon that served as her office. The space was neat but cramped, with a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with bottles and ledgers. "Please sit," she offered, taking her place behind the desk, a position that gave her a sense of control she desperately needed. Vaughn removed his hat as he sat, revealing hair the color of dark honey. "I'll be direct, Miss Nash. I've made some inquiries about Hank Porter." Virginia tensed. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No, you didn't," Vaughn agreed. "But when I see someone being taken advantage of, I can't help but investigate." "And what did your investigation reveal?" Virginia asked, a mix of apprehension and curiosity overriding her initial irritation. "That Hank Porter has a reputation for entrapping business owners, particularly women and immigrants, in contracts designed to keep them perpetually in debt." Vaughn's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes revealed his disgust. "He's done it to at least 3 other establishments in town, eventually forcing the owners to sell to him at a fraction of their value." Virginia wasn't surprised by this information. She'd heard whispers, but having it confirmed sent a chill through her. "And what do you propose I do with this knowledge, Mr. Prescott? The contract is legally binding, unfair as it may be." "I'd like to see this contract," Vaughn said. "If you're willing." Virginia hesitated. The document was both her greatest shame and her most closely guarded secret. Even Mary and Thomas didn't know the full extent of her financial entanglement with Porter. "Why?" she finally asked. "What could you possibly do that I haven't already tried?" "I spent 2 years working for a cattle baron in Texas who fancied himself a lawyer," Vaughn explained. "I picked up a fair understanding of contracts and their loopholes. I might see something you've missed." Virginia considered his offer. There seemed little harm in showing him the contract, especially since he'd already deduced the nature of her relationship with Porter. With a decisive movement, she unlocked a drawer in her desk and removed the document, placing it between them. "There it is, the chain around my neck," she said, attempting lightness despite the heaviness in her chest. Vaughn picked up the contract and began reading, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he turned the pages. Virginia watched him, noting the small furrow that appeared between his brows as he concentrated. This is. Vaughn paused, searching for the right word. Predatory. The interest compounds weekly, not monthly. And these supervision fees, they're completely arbitrary. Tell me something I don't know, Virginia said with a sigh. Vaughn continued reading, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief or anger. When he finally looked up, his blue eyes had hardened with determination. Miss Nash, according to my calculations, you've already paid back the original loan amount. Everything beyond that is usury. Try telling that to Porter, Virginia replied. He insists I still owe nearly $2,000. How much was your original loan? $1,200. I needed it to purchase the saloon and make some repairs. Vaughn nodded, thinking. And how much have you paid him over the past 3 years? Virginia had kept meticulous records of every payment, a habit ingrained by her merchant father. Approximately $1,500, but according to Porter, most of that has gone to interest and fees. This is highway robbery, Vaughn said, his voice low with controlled anger. No wonder you can never get ahead. Virginia reclaimed the contract, returning it to the drawer. It's the situation I'm in, Mr. Prescott. I've consulted the town lawyer, but he's in Porter's pocket. I've approached the bank about a loan to pay Porter off, but they won't lend to a woman without a male cosigner. Vaughn was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the desk. What if I paid it off? Virginia blinked, certain she'd misheard. I beg your pardon. What if I paid Porter what you allegedly owe him? Vaughn repeated, his expression completely serious. $2,000 to free you from this contract. Virginia stared at him, speechless. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. Why would you do that? You barely know me. I know enough, Vaughn said simply. I know you're working yourself to exhaustion to keep a dream alive. I know Porter is slowly crushing that dream for his own profit, and I know I have the means to stop it. Mr. Prescott, Virginia began, struggling to maintain her composure. I appreciate your concern, truly I do. But I can't accept such an offer. The sum is enormous and it's not charity, Vaughn interrupted. It would be an investment. You'd repay me, but with fair terms. No compound interest, no arbitrary fees. Virginia's mind raced. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was like a drowning person being thrown a rope. But pride and caution held her back. And what would you gain from this arrangement? Vaughn held her gaze steadily. The satisfaction of thwarting a man like Porter. And perhaps. He hesitated, a hint of vulnerability crossing his features. Perhaps a reason to return to Salida when the trail season ends. The implication hung in the air between them. Virginia felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Still, she wasn't about to let emotion cloud her judgment. I would need time to consider this, she said carefully. And I would want a proper contract drawn up, one that protects both our interests. Vaughn nodded, a smile playing at his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Nash. Take all the time you need, though I should mention we load the cattle tomorrow afternoon and will be departing the following morning. Virginia couldn't help but return his smile. That doesn't give me much time, Mr. Prescott. Vaughn, he corrected gently. If we're to be business associates, you might as well use my given name. Virginia, she offered in return, the formality between them dissolving slightly. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mary poked her head in, her expression apologetic. Sorry to disturb you, Miss Nash, but breakfast service has begun and there's quite a crowd. Thank you, Mary, I'll be right there. Virginia rose from her desk and Vaughn stood as well. Think about my offer, he said. We can discuss it further this evening. As Virginia returned to her duties, her mind was a whirl with possibilities. Vaughn's offer represented freedom, a chance to escape Porter's ever-tightening grip and truly make the Golden Cactus her own. But it also meant placing her trust in a man she'd known for barely 2 days, a man whose life was spent on the move. Throughout the day, Virginia found herself watching Vaughn whenever he was in the saloon, trying to discern his true character. He interacted with his men firmly but fairly, settled disputes without raising his voice, and tipped generously. When an elderly patron spilled a drink, Vaughn helped clean it up despite the bartender's protests that it wasn't necessary. Small actions, perhaps, but revealing. By evening, the Golden Cactus was again filled with patrons celebrating the cattle drive's successful arrival in Salida. Virginia was serving drinks when she noticed Porter enter the saloon, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on her. With a deliberate movement, he tapped his pocket where she knew he kept the contract, then took a seat at a corner table. The message was clear. He was watching, waiting for her to slip up or show weakness. Virginia straightened her shoulders and continued working, determined not to let him see her anxiety. Later, as the evening crowd began to thin, Virginia found Vaughn at the bar, nursing a whiskey and engaging in conversation with old Pete. When he saw her approach, he excused himself from the prospector and turned his attention to her. "Have you given any thought to my offer?" he asked without preamble. Virginia nodded, her decision made. "I have. I'm willing to accept with conditions." Vaughn's face brightened. "Name them." "We'll have a proper contract drawn up tomorrow morning by Judge Wilson. He's retired, but still handles legal matters occasionally. He's one of the few men in town not beholden to Porter." Virginia spoke quietly, aware of Porter still watching from his corner. "The terms will include a reasonable interest rate and a payment schedule I can manage without sacrificing the saloon's operations." "Agreed," Vaughn said without hesitation. "Anything else?" Virginia took a deep breath. "Yes, I need to understand why you're doing this. The truth, not just platitudes about helping someone in need." Vaughn was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching hers. "The truth is, Virginia, I've been driving cattle for 15 years. I've saved most of what I've earned, with no real purpose in mind beyond the vague notion of someday settling down. When I saw how Porter was treating you and heard about his reputation in town, it awakened something in me. A desire to do more than just pass through people's lives." He paused, taking a sip of his whiskey. "And if I'm being completely honest, there's something about you that—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "That makes me want to know you better. Not as a damsel in distress, but as the strong, independent woman you clearly are." Virginia felt a flush rising to her cheeks. It had been years since a man had expressed interest in her as more than a saloon owner or potential conquest. "That's a lot to admit to someone you've just met," she said softly. "I've found life's too short for anything but honesty," Vaughn replied. "Especially out on the trail, where each day could be your last." Their conversation was interrupted by Porter's approach. "Virginia," he said, his voice falsely jovial, "I couldn't help but notice you've been quite engaged with our cattle drive visitors. Good for business, isn't it?" Virginia straightened, her guard immediately up. "Yes, very good for business. In fact, I'll have your payment ready tomorrow rather than Friday." Porter's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Is that so? Well, perhaps I underestimated your financial acumen." "Perhaps you did," Virginia replied coolly. "If you'll excuse me, I have customers to attend to." As she moved away, she heard Porter address Vaughn. "You seem to have taken a particular interest in Miss Nash's establishment, Mr. Prescott," Vaughn supplied, his tone neutral. "And yes, it's a fine saloon. Miss Nash runs a respectable business. Virginia couldn't hear Porter's response as she served drinks at a nearby table, but the tense set of Vaughn's shoulders suggested it wasn't pleasant. She finished her task quickly and returned to the bar, positioned to intervene if necessary. "Just looking out for her interests," Porter was saying, his voice lowered but audible to Virginia. "A woman alone in this business needs protection. I provide that." "From what I've observed," Vaughn replied evenly, "Miss Nash is quite capable of protecting herself. What she needs is fair treatment, not exploitation." Porter's face darkened. "I don't know what tales she's been spinning for you, Cowboy, but our business arrangement is private and legally binding." "For now," Vaughn said, the simple statement hanging in the air like a challenge. Porter's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Mr. Prescott. Cattle drives pass through, but some of us are permanent fixtures in Salida. It would be unwise to involve yourself in matters that don't concern you." With that thinly veiled threat, Porter tipped his hat to Virginia and departed, the saloon doors swinging in his wake. "That man does not like to be challenged," Virginia observed, moving to stand beside Vaughn. "Men like Porter rarely do," Vaughn agreed. "They mistake intimidation for respect." Virginia glanced around the saloon, noting that only a few patrons remained. "Come to my office in 15 minutes, she said quietly. "We need to finalize our plan." After ensuring that Mary and Thomas had the closing routine well in hand, Virginia retreated to her office. She pulled out fresh paper and began drafting terms for the agreement with Vaughn, determined to make it fair for both parties. She was so engrossed in her task that she started when Vaughn knocked on the open door. "May I come in?" he asked. Virginia nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I've been thinking about the details of our arrangement. I believe I can repay you over 3 years with modest interest, say 5% annually. That would be significantly better than the terms Porter imposed." Vaughn took the seat, reviewing her calculations. "This looks reasonable, but I have a counter-proposal." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper, which he handed to Virginia. She opened it, finding a neatly written document outlining terms even more favorable than what she'd proposed. The interest rate was a mere 3%, with payments to begin after a 3-month grace period. "This is..." Virginia trailed off, struggling to find words. "This is incredibly generous." "It's fair," Vaughn corrected. "Porter's terms were highway robbery. I'm simply offering what any decent banker would." Virginia studied him, still searching for an ulterior motive. "And what happens if I miss a payment? We renegotiate," Vaughn said simply. "No penalties, no compounding interest, no threat of repossession. Just 2 adults finding a solution." It seemed too good to be true, yet Virginia found herself wanting to believe him. There was an earnestness in Vaughn's manner that suggested he meant every word. "Very well," she said, making a decision. "We'll take this to Judge Wilson first thing tomorrow morning. If he approves, we'll proceed with paying off Porter." Vaughn nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Porter will be furious." "Let him be," Virginia replied, a newfound confidence in her voice. "Once the debt is settled, he'll have no legal claim on me or the Golden Cactus." They spent the next hour refining the terms of their agreement, the conversation flowing easily between them. Virginia found herself relaxing in Vaughn's company, sharing stories of her life before Salida, her childhood in Missouri, her brief marriage to a kind but sickly merchant, her decision to start anew in Colorado after his death. In turn, Vaughn spoke of his years on the cattle trails, the hardships and occasional moments of beauty, his dream of eventually settling down on a small ranch of his own. "Why haven't you?" Virginia asked. "Settled down, I mean. You seem to have the means." Vaughn considered the question. Never found the right place, I suppose, or the right reason. He met her gaze, his meaning clear. Virginia felt a fluttering in her chest but kept her expression composed. Well, Mr. Prescott, it seems we have an agreement. I'll meet you at Judge Wilson's office at 8 tomorrow morning. Vaughn rose, understanding that their meeting had concluded. I look forward to it, Miss Nash. After he had gone, Virginia remained at her desk, contemplating the dramatic turn her fortunes had taken. If all went as planned, by this time tomorrow she would be free of Porter's control. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had grown so accustomed to the weight of Porter's contract that its absence might leave her unbalanced, like a prisoner suddenly released after years of confinement. And then there was Vaughn Prescott, a man who had ridden into her life 2 days ago and was now poised to change it completely. His interest in her seemed genuine, his offer of help without obvious ulterior motive. Yet Virginia had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Her husband had seemed healthy when they married, only to succumb to cholera months later. Porter had seemed a reasonable businessman when she signed his contract, only to reveal himself as a predator. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Virginia allowed herself a small measure of hope. Whatever Vaughn's true intentions, his intervention had created an opportunity she couldn't have achieved alone. For that, at least, she was grateful. Morning arrived clear and bright, the summer sun already warming the streets of Salada as Virginia made her way to Judge Wilson's home. She had dressed with care in her best day dress, a navy blue cotton with modest lace trim, and carried a small valise containing the documents they would need. Vaughn was waiting outside the judge's residence, his hat in his hands and his appearance as neat as the trail life would allow. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile. "Ready," Virginia nodded, steadying her nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." Judge Wilson, a tall man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and piercing gray eyes, welcomed them into his study. After hearing their situation, he reviewed the proposed contract with careful attention, occasionally asking for clarification or suggesting minor adjustments to the language. "This appears to be a straightforward and fair agreement," he finally pronounced, setting down his spectacles. Quite a contrast to Porter's usual manipulative documents. "Then you're familiar with Mr. Porter's business practices?" Vaughn asked. The judge's expression hardened. "All too familiar. I've tried to warn folks about his predatory tactics, but he operates within the letter, if not the spirit, of the law, and he's careful to cultivate relationships with those who might otherwise challenge him. Will our agreement stand up to legal scrutiny?" Virginia asked, concerned that Porter might find a way to invalidate it. "It will," Judge Wilson assured her. "Once Mr. Prescott pays your debt to Porter and obtains a receipt of payment in full, your original contract will be null and void. This new agreement will then take its place." With the judge serving as witness, Virginia and Vaughn signed the contract. As Virginia wrote her name, she felt as though a door was opening a path to true independence, free from Porter's manipulation. "Now," said Vaughn, folding the signed contract and tucking it into his vest pocket, "let's find Mr. Porter and settle this account." They found Porter at his office above the mercantile he owned on Main Street. His secretary, a nervous young man with ink-stained fingers, tried to turn them away, claiming Porter was in a meeting. "Tell him Virginia Nash is here to settle her debt," Virginia insisted. "He'll see us." The secretary disappeared into the inner office, returning moments later with a surprised expression. "He'll see you now." Porter was seated behind an imposing desk, papers spread before him and a calculating expression on his face. "Virginia," he greeted her, pointedly ignoring Vaughn. My secretary says you wish to settle your debt. I find that hard to believe, given the substantial amount still outstanding. Nevertheless, it's true, Virginia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mr. Prescott has agreed to pay the remaining balance in full. Porter's gaze shifted to Vaughn, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Has he now? And what does Mr. Prescott expect in return for such generosity? That's between Miss Nash and myself, Vaughn replied evenly. Our only business with you today is to settle her debt and obtain a release from her contract. Porter leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. I see. Well, according to my records, Virginia owes me exactly $2,047. I assume you're prepared to pay that amount. I am, Vaughn confirmed. Though I'd like to review how you arrived at that figure, given that Miss Nash has already paid you approximately $1,500 on a $1,200 loan. Porter's face flushed with anger. The terms of our agreement are clear. Interest and fees have accrued as outlined in the contract she willingly signed. A contract designed to ensure she could never escape it, Vaughn countered, his tone still calm but his eyes hard. But that's a discussion for another time. Today, we're here to pay what you claim is owed and receive written confirmation that the debt is settled in full. Porter stared at them for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he pulled a ledger from his desk drawer and opened it. Very well. $2,047. Cash, I presume? Vaughn reached into his coat and withdrew a leather pouch. He counted out the money meticulously, placing it on Porter's desk in neat stacks. $2,047 exactly, he confirmed. Now the release. Porter's fingers twitched as if eager to sweep up the money, but he maintained his composure. He took out a sheet of paper and wrote upon it, his pen scratching loudly in the tense silence. This document confirms that Virginia Nash has paid in full all debts owed to Henry Porter, including principal, interest, and fees as outlined in our contract, dated June 12, 1876. Said contract is hereby terminated, with all obligations considered fulfilled. He signed it with a flourish and slid it across the desk. Virginia read it carefully, ensuring there were no hidden clauses or loopholes. Satisfied, she passed it to Vaughn, who examined it with equal attention before nodding his approval. Thank you, Mr. Porter, Virginia said formally, rising from her chair. Our business is concluded. Porter's expression was one of barely contained fury. Indeed it is. Though I wonder, Virginia, if you've merely exchanged one master for another. Virginia felt Vaughn tense beside her but placed a restraining hand on his arm. Mr. Prescott is not my master, Hank. He's my business partner, a concept you clearly struggle to understand. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out of the office, Vaughn close behind. They descended the stairs in silence, but once outside on the sunlit street, Virginia stopped and took a deep breath. It's done, she said, a tremulous smile spreading across her face. I'm free of him. Vaughn grinned, the expression transforming his weathered features. Yes, you are. How does it feel? Overwhelming, Virginia admitted. Wonderful and terrifying all at once. Vaughn nodded in understanding. Freedom often is. They walked back toward the Golden Cactus, their steps light despite the weight of what they'd just accomplished. As they reached the saloon's entrance, Virginia paused. Thank you, Vaughn, she said softly. What you've done. I don't have words adequate to express my gratitude. You don't need to thank me, he replied. Just succeed. Make the Golden Cactus everything you've dreamed it could be. Virginia studied him, a question forming in her mind. You're leaving tomorrow morning, aren't you? With the cattle cars, Vaughn nodded, a shadow passing over his features. I have responsibilities, men counting on me, cattle to deliver. Virginia felt a pang of disappointment but concealed it with a practiced smile. Of course. Well, you're welcome at the Golden Cactus whenever you're passing through Salida. About that, Vaughn said, hesitating slightly. I was thinking. The trail season ends in October. After I deliver this herd and the next, I'll have completed my contract with the cattle company. Virginia waited, heart quickening despite her efforts to remain composed. I thought I might return then, Vaughn continued. See how my investment is doing. He met her gaze, his meaning clear. Your investment will be well tended, Virginia assured him, a warmth spreading through her chest. The saloon owner takes her obligations very seriously. Vaughn smiled, reaching out to briefly touch her hand. I never doubted it for a moment. The day passed in a blur of activity as Virginia and her staff prepared for what would likely be their last busy night before the cattle drive departed. Throughout the evening, she was aware of Vaughn's presence in the saloon, his attention often turning to her despite conversations with his men. There was something different in the way they interacted now, a shared secret, a bond forged through their alliance against Porter. As the night wore on, Virginia found herself by Vaughn's side during a quiet moment at the bar. Your men seem in high spirits, she observed, noting the boisterous card games and laughter. End of a long drive, Vaughn explained. Tomorrow we load the cattle, then it's one more night here before heading back south. They've earned their celebration. Virginia nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling that accompanied the reminder of his impending departure. Will your route bring you back through Salida? Not this season, Vaughn admitted. But as I said, once the season ends. He left the sentence unfinished, the promise hanging between them. October is only 3 months away, Virginia said, surprising herself with the boldness of her statement. Vaughn's eyes brightened. 3 months and 2 days, to be precise. Not that I'm counting. Virginia laughed, the sound drawing smiles from nearby patrons who had rarely heard such unguarded joy from the usually reserved saloon owner. Well, Mr. Prescott, it seems you have a talent for calculations after all. Only when they matter, he replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. The following morning, Virginia watched from the saloon doorway as Vaughn and his men guided the cattle toward the stockyards where the trains waited. The street filled with dust, and the sound of lowing as the massive herd moved through town, a controlled chaos orchestrated by experienced drovers. Vaughn rode alongside, occasionally calling out instructions or redirecting a stray animal. He caught sight of Virginia watching and tipped his hat, a gesture that carried more meaning than the casual observer might notice. That evening, the Golden Cactus was quieter than it had been since the cattle drive's arrival. Vaughn and a few of his men were among the patrons, but the atmosphere was subdued, the energy of celebration replaced by the contemplative mood that often accompanies farewells. Near closing time, when only a handful of customers remained, Vaughn approached Virginia as she wiped down the bar. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. "Just for a few minutes. The night's too fine to spend it all indoors." Virginia hesitated, glancing around the nearly empty saloon. Mary caught her eye and nodded encouragingly, silently offering to handle the remaining tasks. "All right," Virginia agreed, untying her apron. "Just let me get my shawl." They walked in comfortable silence down Salida's main street. The summer night was indeed beautiful, with stars scattered across the dark sky and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the nearby mountains. Most businesses were closed, their windows dark, but lamplight still spilled from a few establishments where nightlife continued. "I've been thinking," Vaughn said as they reached the small park at the town center, "about what happens after October." Virginia felt her pulse quicken. "Oh." Vaughn stopped, turning to face her under the soft glow of a street lamp. "I've saved most of what I've earned over the years. Enough to buy a small ranch, perhaps. Colorado has some fine cattle country." "It does," Virginia agreed, hardly daring to interpret his meaning. "The valley just west of here has several successful ranches." "I noticed," Vaughn said with a smile. "Rode through it on our way into town. Beautiful land." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. "Vaughn," Virginia finally said, "are you suggesting that you might settle near Salada?" "I'm suggesting that I'd like to," he replied, his voice low and earnest, "if I had a reason to." Virginia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "And would regular payments on your investment be reason enough?" Vaughn chuckled, the sound warming her even in the cool night air. "It would be a start, but I was hoping for something more, personally rewarding." Virginia felt a blush rising to her cheeks, grateful for the dim light that might conceal it. "Mr. Prescott, are you flirting with me?" "Miss Nash, I believe I am," he admitted with a grin. "Rather awkwardly, I might add. It's been some time since I've attempted it." Virginia couldn't help but smile in return. "I wouldn't say awkwardly, perhaps a bit directly. Trail life doesn't leave much room for subtlety," Vaughn explained, "but I'll try to be more refined if you prefer." "No," Virginia said quickly, surprising herself with her candor. "I appreciate directness. There's been too much manipulation in my life lately." Vaughn nodded, his expression growing serious. "Virginia, I meant what I said about returning after the season ends. These past few days, they've shown me something I've been missing. A purpose beyond the next herd, the next trail." "And what might that purpose be?" Virginia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A place to belong," Vaughn replied simply. "Someone to belong with." The honesty of his admission touched Virginia deeply. It had been years since she'd allowed herself to think beyond daily survival and the constant struggle to keep her business afloat. The possibility of something more, a connection, a partnership beyond business, was both thrilling and terrifying. "3 months is a long time," she said, giving voice to her doubt. "Things change, people change." "Some things don't change," Vaughn countered. "Not when they matter." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it out to her. "I want you to have this." Virginia accepted it, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. It was a silver dollar, polished to a shine and with a small hole drilled near the edge. "Your lucky coin," she guessed. "My promise," Vaughn corrected. "I've carried it since my first cattle drive. It's a reminder of my word that I'll be back for it in October." Virginia closed her fingers around the coin, touched by the gesture and its significance. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. Vaughn smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I know you will." They walked back to the saloon in companionable silence, the coin warm in Virginia's hand. At the entrance they paused, both reluctant for the evening to end. "What time do you leave tomorrow?" Virginia asked, dreading the answer. "Dawn," Vaughn replied. "We need to make good distance before the heat of the day." Virginia nodded, disappointment mingling with understanding. "Then I suppose this is goodbye for now." "For now," Vaughn agreed. He hesitated, then reached out to gently touch her cheek. "May I write to you?" "I'd like that," Virginia said, leaning slightly into his touch. Vaughn's hand moved to cup her face, his thumb tracing a gentle path along her jawline. "Virginia," he murmured, his voice husky. She met his gaze, seeing in it a question. In answer, she rose slightly on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was brief but full of promise, a sealing of their unspoken agreement. When they parted, Vaughn's smile held a mixture of joy and regret. "If I had met you years ago." "But you didn't," Virginia reminded him gently. "You met me now, when we're both ready to recognize what's important." Vaughn nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. "October," he said, the single word a pledge. "October," Virginia echoed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. With a final touch of her hand, Vaughn turned and walked into the night, his tall figure gradually fading from view. Virginia remained on the porch of the Golden Cactus, the silver dollar clutched in her palm, and the taste of his kiss still on her lips. For the first time since arriving in Salida, she felt not just free but hopeful, as if the future held more than mere survival. The following weeks brought significant changes to the Golden Cactus. Free from Porter's financial stranglehold, Virginia implemented improvements she'd long envisioned but could never afford. She hired an additional bartender, expanded the menu to include simple but hearty meals, and renovated 2 of the upstairs rooms to appeal to more affluent travelers. True to his word, Vaughn wrote regularly. His letters arrived every 2 weeks, carried by the stagecoach from various points along the cattle trail. Virginia found herself eagerly anticipating each envelope, savoring Vaughn's descriptions of life on the drive, the characters among his men, and the landscapes they traversed. His writing, like his speech, was direct and honest, occasionally punctuated with dry humor that made her laugh aloud. In return, Virginia shared news of Salida and the Golden Cactus, the small triumphs of her newly independent business, and gradually, more personal reflections. Their correspondence became a bridge across the distance, each letter deepening their connection despite the miles between them. Porter, meanwhile, made his displeasure known through small, petty actions. He discouraged local merchants from extending credit to the Golden Cactus, spread rumors questioning Virginia's business acumen, and instructed his associates to patronize the competing establishment down the street. Virginia weathered these attacks with a composure that surprised even herself. The knowledge that she was free of his contract gave her strength. As did the silver dollar, she now wore on a chain around her neck, a tangible reminder of Vaughn's promise to return. August turned to September, bringing cooler nights and the first hints of autumn to the mountains surrounding Salida. Virginia's business continued to thrive, despite Porter's efforts to undermine it. Word had spread of the Golden Cactus's improved offerings and Porter-free status, attracting customers who preferred to support an independent establishment. In mid-September, Virginia received a letter that made her heart race. "My dearest Virginia, we delivered the final herd yesterday, 2,000 head of prime beef cattle to the Kansas City stockyards. My contract with the cattle company is complete, and I find myself a free man for the first time in 15 years. I write this from a hotel in Denver, where I've stopped to conduct some business before continuing westward. If the weather holds and the stage coaches run on time, I should arrive in Salida by the 2nd week of October. I've thought of little else but returning to you these past months." Our letters have been a lifeline during long nights on the trail, but they are a poor substitute for conversation shared over a glass of your finest whiskey, or a walk beneath Salida's stars. I have much to tell you about my plans, but those words are best spoken in person. Until then, know that I carry thoughts of you with me always, and I look forward to reclaiming my silver dollar and perhaps something even more valuable very soon. With deepest affection, Vaughn. Virginia read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing a wider smile to her face. He was coming back weeks earlier than she dared hope. She pressed the paper to her chest, allowing herself a moment of pure joy before tucking it away with the others in her desk drawer. The days that followed passed both too quickly and too slowly. Virginia threw herself into preparations, ensuring the Golden Cactus was at its best. She had the exterior repainted, the piano tuned, and even splurged on new curtains for the windows. If her staff noticed her increased attention to detail and occasional distraction, they were kind enough not to comment, though Mary's knowing smiles suggested the young woman had guessed the reason. October arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons, the aspen trees in the surrounding mountains turning vibrant yellow against the evergreen backdrop. Virginia found herself checking the stagecoach schedule daily, calculating and recalculating when Vaughn might arrive. It was on a Tuesday morning, during a lull between breakfast and the midday rush, that the saloon doors swung open to reveal a familiar tall figure silhouetted against the autumn sunlight. Virginia, who had been arranging glasses behind the bar, looked up and froze. Vaughn stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands and a smile spreading across his face as he caught sight of her. He wore a new suit rather than his trail clothes, and his hair was neatly trimmed, but his eyes were the same clear blue she remembered. "Miss Nash," he greeted her, his voice sending a shiver of recognition through her. "I believe you have something of mine." Virginia's hand went to the silver dollar hanging from the chain around her neck. "I might," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though I've grown rather attached to it." Vaughn crossed the room to stand before her, the bar between them. "Perhaps we could negotiate a fair exchange." Virginia smiled, aware of Mary and Thomas watching with undisguised interest from across the room. "What did you have in mind, Mr. Prescott?" Vaughn's eyes held hers, his expression softening. "Dinner, tonight. I have a proposition I'd like to discuss." "A business proposition?" Virginia asked, her heart quickening. "Among other things," Vaughn replied, a hint of mischief in his smile. Virginia pretended to consider, though they both knew her answer. "I accept. The saloon closes at 9. "I'll be here at 9:15, Vaughn promised. He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "It's good to see you, Virginia, better than I remembered." Virginia felt warmth spread through her at his words. "It's good to see you too, Vaughn, very good indeed." He tipped an invisible hat, his eyes never leaving hers. "Until tonight, then." As he turned to leave, Virginia called after him, "Where are you staying?" "The hotel on 3rd Street, Vaughn replied, "though I'm hoping that might be temporary." With a final smile that carried a world of meaning, he departed, leaving Virginia to face the knowing looks of her employees. "Not a word," she warned them, though she couldn't keep the happiness from her voice. "We have a saloon to run." The hours until closing seemed to stretch endlessly. Virginia found herself checking the clock so frequently that Mary finally laughed and said, "Time won't move faster for watching it, Miss Nash." At precisely 9 o'clock, Virginia locked the doors after the last patron departed. She hurried to her quarters, changing from her work dress into a deep burgundy gown she'd purchased in Denver during a rare trip for supplies. The dress was more fashionable than her usual attire, with a fitted bodice and modest bustle that accentuated her figure without being inappropriate. She arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style, letting a few curls frame her face, and touched her mother's locket at her throat, the silver dollar on its chain nestled beside it. A glance in the mirror revealed a woman transformed not just by the dress or hairstyle, but by the anticipation brightening her eyes and coloring her cheeks. At 9:15 exactly, a knock sounded at the saloon's back entrance. Virginia opened it to find Vaughn waiting, a bouquet of late-season wildflowers in his hand. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his admiration evident in his gaze. Virginia accepted the flowers with a smile. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Cowboy." Vaughn chuckled, offering his arm. "Shall we? I've made arrangements at the new restaurant on Main Street. I hear their steak is almost as good as trail-cooked beef." The restaurant was small but elegantly appointed, with white tablecloths and actual wine glasses, a rarity in Salada. The proprietor, a French immigrant named Marcel, greeted them warmly and led them to a secluded table near the back. Once they were seated and had ordered steak for Vaughn, trout for Virginia, a momentary shyness fell between them. For months, they had shared their thoughts on paper, the distance allowing for a certain boldness. Now, face to face, the reality of their connection was both more immediate and more complex. "Your letters didn't mention the improvements to the Golden Cactus," Vaughn finally said. "The new paint looks fine. I wanted some surprises for when you returned," Virginia replied, relaxing into the conversation. "The business has been doing well. I've even started repaying your loan. The first installment is ready." Vaughn waved this away. "There's plenty of time for that." "Tell me about Porter. Has he continued his attempts to undermine you?" Virginia nodded, recounting Porter's petty vengeances over the past months. "But they've had little effect," she concluded. "If anything, his actions have made more people supportive of the Golden Cactus." "I'm not surprised," Vaughn said. "People respect independence and resilience. You've shown both." Their meals arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As they ate, Virginia studied Vaughn, noting the subtle changes since their last meeting. He seemed more relaxed, the constant alertness of the trail boss replaced by a quiet confidence. "You mentioned business in Denver," she prompted as they finished their meal. "Successful, I hope," a smile played at Vaughn's lips. "Very. That's part of what I wanted to discuss with you tonight." Virginia raised an eyebrow inquiringly. "I purchased land," Vaughn revealed, leaning forward slightly. 300 acres in the valley west of town. Good grazing land with a year-round creek and a small but solid house. Virginia's heart quickened. "You're staying in Salada then, permanently?" "That's my intention," Vaughn confirmed. "I've ordered a small herd, 50 head to start, with plans to expand gradually. The ranch won't be profitable immediately, but with careful management." "You'll make it successful," Virginia finished for him, confidence in her voice. "You understand cattle better than anyone I've met." Vaughn's expression warmed at her faith in him. "Thank you, but a ranch is more than just cattle. It's a home, a future." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Virginia, these past months have only strengthened what I began to feel during those days in July. I came back to Salada for you, not just the ranch." Virginia curled her fingers around his, her pulse racing. "I'm glad," she said softly. "Very glad." "The thing is," Vaughn continued, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, "I'm not a man for half measures. When I commit to something or someone, it's completely." Virginia met his gaze steadily. "Neither am I. When I care deeply." "Then perhaps," Vaughn said, his voice lowering, "we should discuss a different kind of contract, one based on partnership rather than debt." Virginia's breath caught as she understood his meaning. "That's quite a proposition, Mr. Prescott." "I'm a direct man," he reminded her with a small smile. "Virginia, I'm asking if you might consider a future that includes both the Golden Cactus and the Prescott Ranch and me." Virginia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Are you proposing, Vaughn?" "We've known each other such a short time." "Sometimes," Vaughn said gently, "it doesn't take long to recognize what's right. But no, I'm not proposing, not tonight. I'm suggesting we court properly. Get to know each other here, not just through letters, and then, if you're willing." "I would be," Virginia whispered, the admission feeling like stepping into bright sunlight after years in shadow. "Willing to consider it, I mean, to see where this leads." Vaughn's smile was like a sunrise. "That's all I ask, for now." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Though I should warn you, Miss Nash, I can be quite persuasive when I set my mind to something." Virginia laughed, the sound light and free. "I've noticed, Mr. Prescott, I've definitely noticed." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Virginia's life. Vaughn courted her with a straightforward charm that perfectly balanced respect and growing affection. They took Sunday afternoon rides to his ranch, where Virginia watched the transformation of the property from a neglected homestead to a promising cattle operation. Vaughn hired 2 experienced hands to help with the daily work, allowing him to split his time between the ranch and Salida. In town, he became a regular fixture at the Golden Cactus, often sitting at the end of the bar in the evenings, nursing a whiskey and exchanging pleasantries with patrons. His presence seemed to deter any remaining mischief from Porter, who had apparently decided that Vaughn Prescott was not a man to antagonize further. Their courtship followed the proper forms: chaperoned outings, dinner at respectable establishments, attendance at church socials, but was infused with an undercurrent of deep connection that transcended conventional romance. They shared not just activities but ideas, dreams, and occasional heated debates that ended in laughter rather than discord. By Thanksgiving, the entire town seemed to have accepted their relationship as a foregone conclusion. Even Mrs. Abernathy, not usually given to sentimentality, remarked that they fit together like matching pieces of fine china. It was on a crisp December evening, with snow falling gently outside and the Golden Cactus decorated for the holiday season, that Vaughn finally made his formal proposal. He had asked Virginia to join him for a private dinner in the saloon after closing, and she had agreed, suspecting his intentions but thrilled nonetheless. The main room had been transformed, tables pushed back to create an intimate dining space near the fireplace, candles providing soft illumination, and a small table set with the Golden Cactus's finest china and glassware. Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself with the meal, preparing Virginia's favorite roast beef with all the trimmings. As they finished their dessert apple pie with fresh cream, Vaughn reached across the table to take Virginia's hand. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I spent 15 years wandering, thinking I was searching for the right place. What I didn't realize was that I was searching for the right person." Virginia felt tears gathering in her eyes as Vaughn rose from his chair and knelt beside her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Virginia Nash," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "You are the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known. You faced down Hank Porter when most would have surrendered. You built this business through sheer willpower and integrity. And somehow, in the midst of all that, you found room in your heart for a weather-beaten cowboy with nothing to offer but his heart and his future." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes holding hers steadily. "I love you, Virginia. I want to build a life with you, one where neither of us is ever bound by contracts or obligations, except those we choose freely together. Will you marry me?" Virginia didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, Vaughn Prescott, I will marry you." Vaughn slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of their shared future. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "There's one more thing," Vaughn said, leading her back to her chair. "A wedding gift of sorts." From inside his jacket, he withdrew a folded document and placed it before her. Virginia opened it, her eyes widening as she read. "This is—" "You're transferring the loan to my name?" she asked, confused. Vaughn nodded. "Consider it paid in full. You built the Golden Cactus, Virginia. It should be yours, free and clear." Virginia stared at him, overwhelmed by the gesture. But the money was the best investment I ever made, Vaughn interrupted gently. It brought me to you. That's payment enough. Virginia rose and moved into his arms once more. You're an extraordinary man, Vaughn Prescott. I'm a simple man who knows a treasure when he finds one, he corrected, holding her close. And I intend to cherish that treasure for the rest of my days. They were married on Christmas Eve in Salada's small church, snow falling like a benediction outside the stained glass windows. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by friends from town and the surrounding ranches. Even Porter made an appearance, offering stiff congratulations that suggested a grudging acceptance of their happiness. After a brief honeymoon in Denver, Virginia, and Vaughn settled into a rhythm that balanced both their businesses. The Golden Cactus continued to thrive under Virginia's management, while the Prescott Ranch gradually expanded its operations under Vaughn's careful guidance. They divided their time between the comfortable ranch house and Virginia's rooms above the saloon, eventually deciding to make the ranch their primary residence while maintaining the saloon quarters for busy periods. By the following summer, their happiness was compounded by the news that Virginia was expecting their first child. Vaughn's reaction, a mixture of joy, pride, and absolute terror, became a favorite story among their friends. Their son, Samuel, was born in February of 1881, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth. Over the years, the Golden Cactus evolved from a simple saloon into one of Salada's most respected establishments, a restaurant and gathering place known for its good food, fair prices, and the warm welcome extended by its proprietress. Virginia eventually hired a manager to handle day-to-day operations, allowing her more time at the ranch, though she never fully relinquished her connection to the business that had represented both her prison and her path to freedom. The Prescott Ranch prospered as well, expanding to over 1,000 acres and establishing a reputation for quality beef throughout Colorado territory. Vaughn's experience on the cattle trails gave him insights that many local ranchers lacked, and his fair dealings with both customers and employees earned him widespread respect. Porter's influence in Salada gradually waned as newer, more progressive businesses entered the growing town. Though he remained wealthy, his predatory practices became increasingly unwelcome as the community developed. In a final irony, when he sought to expand his mercantile in 1885, the only bank willing to finance the venture was one in which Virginia held significant shares, a fact she never mentioned to him, though Vaughn often chuckled about it in private. On summer evenings, long after their children were grown and beginning their own adventures, Virginia and Vaughn could often be found on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes they spoke of the future grandchildren, travel, new business ventures. Sometimes they reminisced about the past, the cattle drive that brought them together, the contract that had bound Virginia, the silver dollar that had sealed their promise. But most often, they simply sat in companionable silence, his hand holding hers, their life together a testament to the truth Vaughn had spoken on that long-ago night in the Golden Cactus. Some contracts chain, but others free, and the strongest bonds are those chosen with an open heart and clear eyes. And whenever a new cowboy rode into Salada with trail dust on his boots and dreams in his heart, the old-timers would point him toward the Prescott Ranch, where he might find work, or the Golden Cactus, where he'd certainly find good whiskey and perhaps, if he was very lucky, a story about a saloon owner, a contract, and the cowboy who paid it all and said, "You're free with me."